video, I'm going to talk about a relatively new addition to how we can treat obsessive compulsive disorder. I'm going to take you through a brief overview of a type of treatment which we call inference-based cognitive behaviour therapy, and talk a little bit about how it is slightly different to existing approaches to OCD treatment and what you can expect in the different stages of working through ICBT. So what ICBT seeks to do is it really firms up and gets us to understand why OCD and the things that it tries to convince us of seem so convincing, and how they actually make us come away from our real sense of self, of who we are, and trusting our senses, and cross this kind of metaphorical bridge into this place where we're engaging in the doubts, the obsessions, and all these other kinds of different components of narrative that aren't really based upon anything that is based in the real world, but are simply things which are part of the OCD construction. One of the main aims of inference-based CBT for OCD is that we are kind of teaching our clients to learn to doubt the doubt. And what this means in practice is the doubt can be considered our intrusion. So that is our intrusive thought there that pops into our head, usually taking the form of a what if or a maybe kind of idea. Now, typically we will dismiss these doubts. There's all sorts of doubts that we kind of have throughout the course of the day, and typically we will dismiss them because they don't appear to be relevant to the context in which we are actually having them. What ICBT seeks to do is try to get us to understand why there are certain doubts which, even though they are not relevant to the context in which we are having them, even though we know that actually there's no real sense data or evidence there to support the doubt, it seeks to raise our awareness of what it is about this particular doubt that is so appealing, so convincing, and seems so reasonable to us, that we start to listen to that story, the narrative and the doubt, rather than just dismissing it in favour of just being in the moment. So what ICBT talks about is this concept which we call inferential confusion. And inferential confusion is what happens when the story that our OCD is convincing us of, this narrative, seems so real and so convincing, we then start to become confused as to how much it relates to our real world and our reality. So we take a little look at this model on screen right now. As you can see, our usual experience is a combination of perception and imagination. And we use perception and imagination in this kind of combination all the time just to get through our lives. So for instance, if you're planning what you're going to have for your evening meal tonight, perceptually, you'll probably go and look in the cupboards, you look in the fridge and you'll see what food is there, you'll make sure that the utensils are clean and ready to be used, you might see how many people that you're preparing food for that night. And imagination-wise, you probably start to think about all the different things that you could conjure up with the food that you've actually got in the cupboards in the fridge. You might be thinking a little bit about what people like to eat for their evening meal. You might also be planning what time it is you need to start preparing the food. So typically we've got this real normal combination of perception and imagination, and we just combine the two and we kind of trust our judgment based upon that. That's how we deal with things normally when the OCD isn't there. When inferential confusion pops up for us, what it means is that we tend to confuse all of the imaginal aspects of what we're paying attention to in our minds, the story components. We tend to confuse the imaginal with the perceptive. So we stop paying attention to our sense data so much, we stop trusting what we can see there in front of us, and we start to listen to the components of our imagination. What this then means is then we confuse imaginal aspects for real life experience. And what we will then do is we will start acting and behaving and thinking as though the imaginal is our reality. So let's consider this in the scope of a particular OCD subtype. Let's consider it in the case of, say, harm-based OCD. So in harm-based OCD, we know that we're sitting there with family, say, and we're having a doubt pop into our heads. What if I attack a family member? Now, even though in that context, if we were to trust our perception, I've got no desire to kind of take that action. I'm not kind of planning on it. I'm actually sitting there with a family member, we're relaxed, we're watching TV, we're talking to each other, we're smiling at each other. Perceptually, there's nothing in that kind of context which justifies me paying attention to the doubt, what if I harm that family member? But the inferential confusion bit comes in where OCD will pick different components of narrative, different kind of justifications to make me think that the doubt has relevance to that situation. And then I'll have that doubt, what if I want to cause harm to a family member? I'll start listening to that narrative. I'll stop trusting the fact that I'm just sitting here chilled with my family member. And I'll then think I've got to start actually addressing, resolving and doing something to get rid of this doubt based upon the narrative components that OCD has convinced me of. The problem with this is because the actual justifications for the narrative are not based on sense data in the here and now. They're not easily resolved. If there's not something there that is, in my external world at that point in time, then what is going to happen is that I will start going further and further and deeper into this narrative, into my thinking, into my obsessions and my compulsions, as a way of, resolving that doubt. What if I would harm a family member? So this is the point at which we call inferential confusion. So even though we're not going to act on that thought, even though it's totally egotistonic and goes against who we are, we're listening to the story. Next thing you know, we're kind of hiding knives, we're avoiding the family members, we're trying to reassure ourselves that we're not going to engage in that thing. So as we progress through the ICBT model, we're really kind of emphasising this idea there that OCD is 100% subjective, it's 100% imaginal, and is 100% irrelevant to the context in which we're engaging in the doubt. And what this means as we start to build up our awareness of that is that we start to cultivate this idea that we've got a choice about whether we listen to this story or whether we trust our senses, trust who we are, and make a decision to stay in the real world of perception, trusting ourselves, trusting who we are, etc. As we progress through the ICBT model, we come to this point where we are kind of visualising that there's actually a crossover point, a choice point, where we can actually visualise this particular doubt has got the potential to take me across that bridge, into that narrative again, change how I feel, make me feel more distressed, kind of dissociate a little bit, and listen to this whole OCD story, which, again, we've probably done it 100 times before, we've probably got caught up in this narrative 100 times before. We know it doesn't actually lead to a resolution, but it's getting us to feel confident with the idea there that, do you know what, we've got a choice about whether we listen to this OCD story or whether we trust who we are and stay in the moment and trust that world of the senses. As we develop that awareness of the fact that OCD is subjective, we do have freedom as to whether we listen to the story or not. We then also want to get to a point where we're kind of developing our ability to trust our senses in the present moment. It gets us to a place where we trust what we call the real self, who we really are, and starting to feel a little bit more confident and building up this idea there that everything we need, everything we've got, exists before the point where we engage in the doubt. Safety, our sense of self, our ability to trust our senses, it all exists just before we start to do that crossover point and cross over the bridge into the OCD narrative. We can sometimes convince ourselves that the solution to our OCD is more thinking. The solution to our OCD is avoidance, is trying to work this stuff out. But that is the key trap that we're trying to reduce when we do our ICBT work. So it's kind of really getting up to this point there where, actually we've got total safety, a sense of self, who we are, exists before we engage in that doubt, and just really building up that ability to feel safe before we bite on that OCD narrative, and trusting our ability just to, free ourselves up, not to kind of engage in that story. So inference-based CBT offers quite a distinctive way of working when we compare it to other psychotherapies like exposure and response prevention or more appraisal-based cognitive behavioural treatments for OCD. And all that means for us is that we've just got a broader toolkit there. So, absolutely, there is lots and lots of people who respond to exposure and response prevention, lots of people who are exposed to more appraisal-based CBT, and again, we've got this other kind of thing there in our toolkit, the ICBT, which again is another strategy, another way of overcoming OCD. So that's just a whistle-stop tour of inference-based CBT. If you're interested in finding out more about inference-based CBT, there are lots of good websites. There's a fantastic website set up by the people who developed ICBT. If you're interested in getting in touch with me, then you can contact me on www.accesscbt.co.uk or on my positive psychology site, which is www.purepositivepsychologycoaching.com, and we can continue the conversation there. But I hope you found this video useful. I will expand upon this in future videos and look more at the modules of the ICBT in a little bit more detail. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching.